Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wanted to comment today on the development in Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Israeli assault on the worshippers on the last Friday of Ramadan, and more broadly, the continued assault on Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem in general. Let me first correct the framing. These are not clashes because, in essence, says clashes developed at Al-Aqsa Mosque between Palestinians and the Israelis. Uh, the correct framing is that the Israeli army assaulted worshippers on Al-Aqsa compound on the last Friday of Ramadan. Furthermore, they have attacked the actual mosque, throwing stun grenades, smoke bombs, and all types of military projectiles on the Al-Aqsa, while over 70,000 worshippers were present in the Al-Aqsa compound. The second corrections to be made that the site is an Islamic site. There is often this notion that they're referring to the site as Al-Aqsa and Temple Mount. And this is, in essence, is an increasing attempt to create an association between Al-Aqsa Mosque area and the dreamed about or hoped for or settler planned attempt to have a foothold in the Al-Aqsa compound. This is a religious Muslim site, has been so since the possibly as early as 638 of the Common Era, and as such to refer to it other than Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that the Israeli army and the Israeli government authorizing the attack on a Islamic religious site at a time where worshippers are present in there. So that's a second correction that needs to be made in relations to what transpired today. Third, that the Israeli army that attacked Al-Aqsa compound also attacked the hospital, the emergency unit that is there in Al-Aqsa compound, and as such also violated existing rules and regulations, whether it's the Fourth Geneva Convention or basic human rights and human dignity, that to attack hospital and emergency facilities with, again, stun grenades, tear gas, and other types of instruments that the Israeli army deployed. The last item, that the Israeli army has no business to be in Al-Aqsa compound, period. And this is something that we need to insist, and anyone that begins to try to, again, use the form of clashes and so on to rationalize that it is the Israeli army and it's the Israeli government that is violating the sanctity of this place and continues to harass. And actually, the harassment continued from the beginning of Ramadan by constantly prohibiting and making it difficult for Muslim worshippers to actually arrive and pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, especially those from outside Jerusalem, from the West Bank and other areas. Now let's speak about Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood has been at the center of Israeli settlers who are attempting again to take parts of East Jerusalem to encroach on the Palestinian properties. And this is being done or has been done with the full support of the Israeli government. Not only Netanyahu, but successive Israeli government have all constantly emboldened and engaged in facilitating the settlers' takeover of Palestinian homes in Jerusalem, but also the various parts of the West Bank. What Sheikh Jarrah, and one can add Sheikh Jarrah area, Wadi al-Joz, Silwan, all these areas are critical pathway and gate to East Jerusalem, and also they're the gate to Al-Aqsa Mosque area that is predominantly inhabited by Palestinian Muslims and also Christian communities. So this attempt is to take one house at a time, one neighborhood, one property, in order to continue the process of ethnic cleansing. Now, when I use the term ethnic cleansing, I don't use it lightly. Israel has been created on the top of an ethnic cleansing project. Just recently, actually yesterday, there was an article in Haaretz that spoke, at least began, looked at Ben Gurion's memoirs from 1948 to 53, where he actually made sure to discuss keeping and the Arabs out, those who fled during the war, and to make sure that they will not be allowed to enter back into Palestine to frustrate their ability. Ethnic cleansing has been part and parcel of the Zionist project from the time of Herzl to spirit the penniless population across the Jordan River and seek to it to be employed in other regions to empty Palestine. So when I say ethnic cleansing, I'm very cognizant of this word. Ethnic cleansing is also a constitutive part when we speak about settler colonialism. Settler colonialism always has two elements in it: genocide, ethnic cleansing, as a part and parcel of it, and then the whole project of transfer ethnic cleansing. Right. So if we think about the Americas and what happened to the indigenous population, genocide and transfer. So Israel has been engaging in this process since 48. One of the most important pillars within settler colonialism, and one can actually say in terms of as a settler colonial project is a racist project at the core, is this demographic engineering that takes place, the preoccupation with demography, wanting to create particular demographic structures, racial classification, geographical demarcation, surveillance structures, frustrations in relations to permitting, and so on. And then, if we think about the layer of ethnic cleansing included into it and whole apartheid structure as the most recent human rights report, we can understand what is occurring in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. That Israel is committing, Israel and Israeli government, Israeli leadership, having shifted all the way to the extreme right, not to absolve the left of engaging in ethnic cleansing. It did, and also continued to dispossess the Palestinians. But today we're dealing with predominantly an egregious right wing, extreme right wing government in Israel that is committing itself to ethnically cleanse and transfer the Palestinians. If not in mass, it is through a whole process of silent ethnic cleansing by taking homes, expelling people from their homes, uh, by making it difficult for people to actually survive. Permits are not given to Palestinians in Jerusalem to expand their homes, while the same is not done to the Israeli population. The silent ethnic cleansing in terms of confiscating Jerusalemite, Jerusalem Palestinian residents' ID card, residency ID card. So, for example, if you go out to study in America, Europe, or any other place, you're required to come back and renew your residency, while the same is not applicable to the Jewish residents of Jerusalem, which in essence is to make it impossible or to make it difficult for individuals. And you're often your ID, your Jerusalem ID, is confiscated, and thus you become really, in the full sense of the word, stateless as a Palestinian. So that's part of the Israel projects to demographically design the population in Palestine to maintain or to actually expand decisive Jewish majority. And that has been done over a period of time. So ethnically cleansing Palestinians, silent ethnic cleansing, removing the Jerusalem ID cards, but also importantly, we have to think about another element of how to maintain demographic majority. Israel has constantly expanded the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem to include settlements while actually excluding and removing Palestinian population. So in this sense, to maintain some 27% or 30% to 67, 70% type of ratio. In essence, to maintain a decisive majority. So it's not that you have a change in the demographic, that Israel changes the demographics by changing the boundaries, which I call it, colonial legalism that Israel constantly engage in. And the absurdity in relation to Sheikh Jarrah, that the Palestinians have to go to the Israeli Supreme Court, which has already permitted the settlers to claim land and property. More importantly, the Israeli legal system already considers Palestinian lands, Palestinian areas, the West Bank as disputed territory, which means if a thug, if a robber from the settlers come and steal your home in the middle of the night, they have as much standing, if not equal or more standing than you, who are actually an owner of the house that has been in the family for generations. Right, tracing the ownership of the house for generations, and often also the settlers bring fake documents, forged document literally, and these Israeli courts, who actually represents the settler colonialist legalism, actually gives the stamp of approval for the allocations or giving this house to the settler who possibly have just arrived from the United States as doing aliyah, which is to migrate to Israel. They're given citizenship, they're given access, they're given tax breaks, and they're incentivized to live in the settler. So in essence, in here, what we need to point out that the United States foreign aid to Israel that goes on a daily basis is malleable, meaning that it allows the Israeli government to so-called absorb the individuals that migrating into Israel. Only Jewish individuals, again, Jewish Zionist individuals that migrate. So a Palestinian want to migrate to his historical homelands in Palestine, they're not permitted. So that's another aspect of the firm apartheid that even regulates the immigration population coming into Palestine. So a Palestinian who has his home, his land, his lineages there is not actually permitted. So in this sense, they are incentivized by the government. They are given the legal protection by the courts. And then the Palestinians, whether in Jerusalem or in the West Bank, are subject to a whole systematic process of military regulations, of oppression, of ethnic cleansing, and again, the term apartheid now it should be used. And I'm happy that Human Rights Watch had caught up with what we already been saying and experiencing. Again, Carter was, at least in his book Peace Not Apartheid, have used that term much earlier. But today we're dealing with apartheid. And if you're watching the news and seeing these settlers protected by the Israeli army taking on these houses, these are literally colonizers, settler colonizers that are taking indigenous people's land in front of our eyes, and they're putting a structure of apartheid that is based on a racial, religious demarcation between the Palestinians and the Israeli settlers in there. And no one today should be allowed to speak on any issue of justice, fairness, political engagement without having to speak on the question of Zionism, the questions of Israel and U.S. aid to Israel, especially here in the United States. And again, I'm aware that the Arab world has began and continue to normalize, but again, these are individuals that have lost the dignity of what it means to be Arab, what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be individuals that will actually stand in solidarity. Right? So again, whether you're talking about the United Arab Emirates, you're talking about Egypt, you're talking about Mauritania, you're talking about even Morocco, all these that are rushing and rushing just to normalize because they think they're going to be included in any type of a political, regional political arrangement. They are just completely mistaken. The address for the region comes through the Jerusalem, comes through the Palestinians. And you could engage in your cake, normalization cake, and eat it too, but the cake is poisonous. The cake is based on settler colonialism. The cake is based on Eurocentric racial demarcation. And don't think because you're invited into what you call gatherings of importance or on dinner gatherings that speaks in these flowery language, you are still seen as literally as a person that sold their own people. So don't think that if they are praising you, they're praising you because you are of a dignity. They know that you already have accepted to be a shoe shiner as a way to actually make your upward mobility. So we need to understand the dynamics that are taking place. And I'll include with this also any part of our Muslim diaspora, Arab diaspora, Palestinian diaspora that confuse, interfaith gather that confuse discussions and conversations. It confuse this with actually normalizing and putting a stamp of approval for settler colonialism that is still unfolding in Palestine. So in this last few days of Ramadan, and as we see the assault in Palestine, we'll continue to insist that we are returning and we will be there. And as some of the signs in Jerusalem says, "Lan narhal." If you don't understand in Arabic, I'll translate it. We're not leaving. And for you to say Palestine is and it will be and will continue to be, no matter what ethnic cleansing, what transfer, whatever despotic plans that Israel and its allies, whether local or global, continue to exhibit. So Palestinians are here to stay. And if you are not used to it, you better get used to it more so and more often than not. So wanted to just share my thoughts as we see what's unfolding in Jerusalem. Say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your fasting, your prayers, your dua, and we'll continue to mobilize for in behalf of justice and in behalf of dignity for the Palestinians. And we will see a free Palestine and we will gather in Al-Aqsa Mosque to celebrate that occasion, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.